The Circle of Hope pastors are here. I'm Johnny. We have Rachel and Ben. I'm going to keep looking at the camera because I can never look at the camera. And the question that we have today, we're in this series called Someone Asks, where we try to answer questions people offer us in a succinct way, in a candid way. The question at hand today is probably too big for this video, but we're going to give it a shot anyway. What is sin?
Yeah, it's probably too big. It's a little too big. It's like the whole cosmology of the universe and like how everything works. But I think that when people are asking this question, I'm thinking that I start with where I imagine a lot of people are at, though that might not be you. But usually it's like when I messed up, or when I did the thing I didn't want to do, when I cheated, when I lied, when I stole, the big 10 in the rules that you broke that God
set down. The 7
sins,
the 7 deadly sins.
Yeah. But I think that it's bigger than that. I think that sin isn't just about what I did. It's a condition that we find ourselves in, right, Johnny?
Yeah, isn't that right? That the way, especially the New Testament and the Old Testament writers are talking about sin, it's not a matter of individual action or a summary of individual action. So I think that in fact, we do sinful things all the time to one another, but it's a result of the condition of the world. And when and it's hard to talk about sin if you don't talk about how Jesus conquers sin, right? The fruit of sin is death. Jesus conquers that. That's the condition of the world. And salvation saves the whole world. That's the idea that we're working with. A little bit more about that later, I think. But what else, Rach?
Yeah, I mean, that's the ultimate comforting reality. Jesus is saving the whole world. But I think that there are these personal implications to sin that cause us suffering.
Agreed.
And so I think part of Jesus living into that salvation that I'm being offered is like learning about myself as a creature, and what are those things that cause me suffering, or that feeling of disconnection from God. And I'm happier when I don't do them.
Right.
Yeah, and that might be like, what does sin do? It causes suffering. But if you go to like, is suffering sin? Then you're in like kind of dicey territory.
Oh,
like the question, what is sin? Is like, that's why it's too big. Like, we might be able to see the effects of sin pretty easily, but actually giving it a definition is quite difficult, even if we use all of the parts of the Bible that mention it.
Good point, Ben, because suffering is a reality of life. And in fact, I think a lot of sin and pain and evil in the world comes from our unwillingness to suffer. It's when we want to go around suffering instead of go through it with Jesus. Jesus enables us to suffer creatively.
Yeah. And the idea that escaping suffering somehow leads us to a sinless life is tricky, right? That's not the idea that we're going. Jesus is teaching us how to suffer, right? That's exactly right. I get caught up in it because I know that I feel bad when I do something wrong, and I actually know that little piece of self-condemnation that I give myself isn't my fullest, my truest self either. And so I've sinned twice. The first thing, and then feeling bad about that thing, right? That's a really hard cycle to disrupt. Jesus needs to keep saving me from my shame and moving me toward my full and true self, individually and also cosmically. Cosmically is a word for like the whole world and even more than the world, right?
But it is hard to talk about sin without talking about the solution, and you kind of paying attention to your patterns and how when you're trying to break out of patterns of sin, and even seeing, sin being a part of your escape. Like it's like you can't get out, you're just like kind of stuck. And I think sometimes it feels that way. And certainly without what Jesus has done for us, we are stuck. And we do run into all the walls that we create to protect ourselves and to save ourselves. But in fact, Jesus, what is sin? Sin ain't no thing.
That's right.
It's dead and done. And if we walk in the light, it says in 1 John, we are sinless, and yet also, if we say we are without sin, we're liars. So it's this kind of paradox, this reality that we're living in that I love to go to First John to look at. But I want to get practical about it, because if I can get out of that shame that Johnny's talking about, I can actually like do something and achieve some freedom from that which plagues me.
And
Yes.
y'all know that song that we love and probably sing like once a month at one of our congregations? Andrew Yang wrote it. And there's a line in it that says, "Our sinful selves have died. With you, they were crucified." And so that's the hope you can hold on to. So even if you go back to your patterns, even if you're despairing at the sin of the world, the work is complete in defeating it, even as we still struggle with it now. This is this both andness, the kingdom of God being here and coming, the restoration of the earth happening now, and also coming in its fullness in an age to come. These things are all working together. And I want to encourage you and say, especially if you're connected to a church body or to our church, you're participating in the redemption of the world with your new self. And I hope that encourages you in your seasons of maybe feeling, bad about yourself or self-condemning or self-deprecating.
I want to add one thing. No, you go ahead, Rachel. I've said enough.
No. I was just saying that's the gospel. That it's Jesus is saving us from this moralistic self-assessment that we're never gonna measure up on. Ultimately, it's relying on the grace and mercy of God and trusting in that love. Go ahead, Ben.
Final word, Ben.
I was just going to riff a little bit on other songs that are popular in the Christian hymn book that we often refer to ourselves as sinners, which of course, like I was talking about in First John, we are sinful and we do sin, and it's kind of a place that we're stuck and still experiencing the patterns of sin, but we are free. So I think we in Circle of Hope kind of err on the side of of what is to come, that already Jesus has done something that makes us capable of living a life free from sin. And so I'm not a sinner. That's not my identity. Though I do sin and still struggle with all kinds of things all the time. I'm loath to embrace that as who I am. And that emphasis makes us distinct, I think.
So receive that, friends. Even when you feel like a worm or a wretch, you're a child of God. You're saved. That means something. I hope you receive that, and that can combat the negative messages that we hear, sometimes in our own minds and sometimes given to us. So be at peace, be full, be restored. We love you. See you next time.